Today, we're going to be talking about hormone optimization, and we're mainly going to be focusing on estrogen and testosterone and their derivatives. The release of these steroid hormones from the adrenals, in particular testosterone and some of its related derivatives, are mainly activated by competition. Competition is a powerful influence on the sex steroid hormones, and the sex steroid hormones powerfully influence competition. Most people don't realize this, but most males of a given mammalian species never get to reproduce. In fact, they never even get to have sex at all. And we don't often think about that, but testosterone plays a powerful role in determining which members of a given species will get to reproduce, which ones of that species will actually get access to females. And so here I'm not talking about humans specifically, but it's well known that the higher levels of testosterone correlate with access to females. The males that have higher testosterone forage further and will fight harder for the females. And this is really interesting because there's very good evidence now that testosterone can reduce anxiety, promote novelty seeking, and promote competitive interactions. Testosterone has this incredible effect of making effort feel good. But what I was really referring to is the fact that testosterone lowers stress and anxiety, in particular in males of a given species. So it is the case that increases in testosterone promote competitive and foraging type behaviors in humans and in non-human mammals. But it's also true that competitive environments themselves can increase testosterone. The real question then is, does sex itself promote testosterone? And the answer is somewhat complicated, but the short version is yes. And as you recall, sex has multiple stages. So there's the physical act of sex, there's the seeking of sex, and then there's orgasm and ejaculation. Now, it's important to distinguish between these because whether or not sex itself increases testosterone depends on whether or not the male ejaculates. These are quality studies showing that men who observe sex, so I guess this would be observing pornography, they had increases in testosterone that were very modest, of about 10%. Whereas when people participated in sex, they had 70% increases in testosterone. So there are increases in testosterone that are quite significant during the physical act of sex, and far less so during observing sex. Sex and ejaculation itself does not reduce testosterone levels. However, abstinence or sex without ejaculation for a week or more will increase testosterone levels up to 400%. What it means is that sex itself increases testosterone. However, abstinence also increases testosterone even further. So it's a nuanced answer. And I hope this is satisfactory, no pun intended, to those of you that have been asking me, what is the relationship between sex and ejaculation and testosterone and dopamine? It is nuanced. And you have to understand that nuance if you want to understand how certain behaviors impact hormones and how hormones impact those behaviors. And so we all know, because now we've been told a lot in the last decade or so, that getting proper sleep is important for all these aspects of health. Getting proper sleep can really offset all the reductions in testosterone and estrogen and reductions in fertility that occur if we don't get enough sleep, but how sleep actually adjusts things like testosterone and estrogen. So the simple version of this is getting your breathing right during the waking hours, meaning primarily, unless you're working out really hard or there's some other reason why you're maybe eating or speaking that you need to be breathing through your mouth, you should be a nose breather. There's really good evidence for that now. And in sleep, you also want to be a nose breather because that's going to increase the amount of oxygen that you're bringing into your system and the amount of carbon dioxide that you're offloading. There are other positive effects of it as well, but you're basically reducing apnea. Breath holding in sleep leads to buildup of carbon dioxide and leads to increases in cortisol, which then decrease testosterone and decrease estrogen in negative ways across all sexes. Okay, so the simple version of this is get your breathing right. And many of you have heard me talk about this before, that viewing bright light within the first hour of waking, whether or not it's from artificial light or ideally from sunlight, has these powerful effects on sleep and wakefulness. This translates to the protocol of, if you want to optimize testosterone and estrogen, you need to get your light viewing behavior correct. It's not just about optimizing your sleep, which is also important. It's about getting sufficient amount of light in your eyes so you have sufficient levels of dopamine. So the simple protocols for that I've reviewed before, but it means getting anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes of bright light exposure in your eyes early in the day. It is not sufficient to do this with sunglasses unless you have to do that for safety reasons. It's fine to wear prescription lenses and contacts. If you can't get sunlight for whatever reason, you want to use bright artificial light. The other other aspect of light viewing behavior that's extremely important is to avoid bright light exposure to your eyes in the middle of the night. If you're viewing bright light in the middle of the night, you are suppressing dopamine release. If you're suppressing dopamine release, you are suppressing testosterone levels. So much so that I would wager that a major effect of sleep deprivation on reducing testosterone and estrogen is not necessarily because of the lack of sleep per se. It's because usually when people are not getting enough sleep, they're getting too much light in their eyes in the middle of the night as well. So you can't even begin to talk about supplements and other ways to optimize testosterone, diet and its effects on testosterone and estrogen and fertility and reproductive behavior, etc., until you get your breathing right, until you get your light viewing behavior right. So now let's talk about how exercise in its various forms, weight training, endurance work, weight training to failure, or less intense weight training, can impact testosterone levels. Heavy weight training, but not weight training to failure, where completion of a repetition is impossible, but where basically people are working at anywhere from like 70% to 95% of their maximum, or sometimes even going right down to their one repetition maximum, leads to the greatest increases in testosterone. There's clearly a influence of hard work at the neural level and then at the muscular level for increasing testosterone. And there's also clearly an effect of working too hard and presumably increasing cortisol too much in terms of reducing testosterone. But this basically boils down to a particular set of protocols where if you want to increase testosterone for whatever reason, that weight training with heavy loads, but not to failure, seems to be the best supported, at least scientifically supported solution to that. Okay, so now let's talk about the role of specific compounds, many of which can be taken in supplementation form or extracted from diet and nutrition in order to optimize sex steroid hormones. And again, I just want to emphasize that I'm not suggesting anyone take anything or stop taking anything. This is purely for informational purposes, but some of the data on these is quite striking and impressive. Vitamin D, which is important for so many biological functions, including endocrine functions. Zinc, magnesium, creatine. It's very clear that something about creatine, although the mechanism isn't exactly clear, either increases 5-alpha reductase or makes the testosterone molecule more susceptible to certain enzymatic reactions that leads to increases in DHT. DHT, dihydrotestosterone, has this dramatic role in creating a kind of masculinization of the brain prenatally. It also defines the primary sex characteristic of the growth of the penis, and it has powerful effects in creating balding, in beard growth, etc., and it has a much higher affinity for the androgen receptor than does testosterone. So creatine can increase DHT, which means that if you take creatine and you're very DHT susceptible, then you might experience some hair loss. This has been heavily debated. Does creatine cause baldness? It's going to depend. It's going to depend on how much 5-alpha reductase you have and how prone to hair loss you are. Some people can take creatine without any problem in terms of hair loss. Some people cannot. There are a few other things that can increase testosterone, in particular tonga ali. This has been shown in several studies that it does seem to have some pro-fertility, pro-free testosterone, and subtle aphrodisiac effects. It does also seem to be a slight anti-estrogen. The reports of this are people take this anywhere from 400 to 800 milligrams a day. Again, I'm not suggesting you do that, but that's kind of what's out there. And there is some decent scientific literature to support the fact that it liberates some of the bound testosterone and allows more free testosterone to be available. Some of the reported quote-unquote side effects are things like excessive alertness and insomnia if it's taken too late in the day and so forth. So we talked about creatine, we talked about tonga ali. It's clear that boron, there's some scientific support for it freeing up more testosterone. And again, freeing up testosterone may be exactly what you want. The amounts of boron that people take, and you can find this again on PubMed or Examine, but people take a couple grams of it a day. I'm not aware of any specific side effects, but you always want to examine for the particular side effects. And one of the more well-documented ones is Phaedogia agrestis, which can increase levels of luteinizing hormone and thereby levels of testosterone or levels of estrogen. And again, if an individual were to take Phaedogia agrestis, what they would probably find is that testosterone and estrogen would increase in anyone of any chromosomal or gonadal background, but remember, it's the ratio of both. So both, if someone has low estrogen, high testosterone, then both of those would be expected to increase. And if someone has high estrogen and low testosterone, then both of those would increase by taking Phaedogia agrestis. The side effect profile of Phaedogia agrestis hasn't really been documented, so it's a little unclear. I just want to emphasize that anytime someone's going to start taking supplements that or modifying sex steroid hormones, getting blood work done is extremely important for safety reasons and also just to know whether or not things are working.